right? 5 husbands, right? Okay. Now, what happened was that Draupadi in her previous birth had got a boon that she will have 5 husbands, so that's how she got Pandavas and this thing. Now, Vyas explained how Nalayani was reborn as the daughter of the king of Panchal, how she was not conceived in the womb normally but appeared out of a sacrificial fire where the king was performing a powerful sacrifice. Right. She was known as Draupadi because she was immediately adopted by the king, whose name was Draupad. Her complexion was dark, her eyes scintillated like the surface of a lotus pond, her tresses were long and felt in ringlets. She grew up in the palace, and when the time came for the king to think of her marriage, he announced to the whole world that his daughter was about to choose a husband through Swambara. So Swambara is basically a process of choosing your husband. So ladies used in the ancient times used to choose their own husbands, right? A suitor to qualify himself for her attention would have to accomplish an extraordinary feat of archery. A target in the shape of a fish would be hoisted on a column beyond layers of revolving discs, each with a hole in its center. The suitor must first string an enormous bow and hit the target with one of the 5 arrows. Not looking up but looking down at the reflection of the target in a pool of oil. So extremely tough. पहले तो bow को डालो, फिर oil में देखो, and then उसको target को बनाओ. Whoever succeed would be acceptable to the princess. The announcement went out far and wide. On an auspicious day, the princes from all corners of the country assembled in Panchal, the kingdom. A special pavilion was built to accommodate the hundreds of competitors, visitors, and spectators. Decorated caparisoned elephants and horses of the visiting princes and their followers were tethered in all open spaces. On learning of this contest, the Pandavas, disguised as Brahmins, arrived and unobtrusively occupied a few back streets. The other competitors preened themselves and examined each other with haughty envy and suspicion. At an appointed hour, Draupadi arrived at the center of the pavilion with a garland in her hand, and the competition began. The announcer called upon the contestants in the assembly to approach the huge house placed at the center of the hall and lift it and shout. The princes from the warrior class were the first to approach, but most of them withdrew after one look at the bow. One or two dropped at their toes, dropped it on their toes. Some could not even stretch the steel coil forming the bowstring. The king's daughter watched the process of elimination with relief. She saw the princes wearing decorations and imposing battle dress coming on haughtily and retreating hastily, and galloping away on their horses. Comments, jokes, and laughter filled the air. The Corvals were in a group in one corner of the hall, watching contemptuously the rivals in the departures. Kern, the most gifted master of arms and archery, was there, and Duryodhan, the king of Hastinapur, and the chief moving spirit in the rival camp, expert warrior, man of hate, gifted, strong, and merciless. His brothers and henchmen occupied the seats of honor and joined at the candidates and jeered at the candidates who failed. A lull fell on the assembly when their turn came, and the girl shivered instinctively and prayed to the god that he saved them from them. She watched with apprehension as Karn approached the bow and lifted it as if it were a toy. He stood it on its end and stretched out the bowstring. The ends almost touched. But when there was still a width of a walnut to go before the string snapped back, almost knocking him down, he withdrew. Next came Duryodhan. He held the bow firmly and stretched the string, but recoiled when he still had to cover a gap of width of a black gram. He had dislocated his finger and dropped the bow and withdrew with a groan. The crowd bellowed with excitement. There was a stir as one got up from the Brahmin group. There were shouts of protest. How dare a Brahmin enter this contest, which is open only for the warrior class? Let Brahmins stick to their scriptures. But the king made a ruling that, as he had mentioned no caste in the announcement, anyone was free to try his luck. Arjun approached the being. How? The being of the son of Indra, he was auspicious looking, strong, and beautiful. One look at him and Draupadi became anxious lest he should fail. He not only strung the bow but hit the target again and again 5 times. Draupadi approached him with the garland of flowers and slipped about it in his neck. At that moment they were betrothed. Arjun took her hand and led her off. There was at once a commotion. We have been cheated. How can a Brahmin be allowed to win a Kshatriya bride? We will not allow it. We'll king this king and carry away the girl. Fighting broke out, and the king's bodyguard met the threat with appropriate action. Bhim, the strong brother among the Pandavas, was seen guarding the girl, armed with trunks of 2 huge trees, which he had plucked out of the park. The 5 brothers, accompanied by the girl, went home to the potter's cottage, where they lived and where their mother awaited their return. It was there that Bhim announced from the doorstep, Mother, we have brought home a bhiksha. And she answered from inside, share it amongst yourselves. Draupadi was wedded to the brothers according to the strictest ritual. The first to clasp her hand for the god to fire to witness was the eldest Yudhishthir. Next came the mighty Bhim, and after him the actual winner of her hand, Arjun. And lastly the twins, one after the other. She was to live with each brother for 1 full year as his wife, and then pass on to the next. When she lived with one, the other brothers had to eradicate from their minds completely the image of her as a wife. It needed a very special kind of detachment and discipline of mind to practice this code. Anyone who violated or even thought called himself from the family and had to seek expiration in a strenuous pilgrimage in the holy rivers. At Hastinapur, the capital of the rival cousins, the Kauravas, whose king was Duryodhan, there was much uneasiness at the realization that the Pandavas were still alive. The Kauravas had planned several schemes to exterminate the Pandavas, who came through all of them unscathed. Lastly, they had devised a masterly scheme to house the Pandavas in an inflammable wax mansion which was calculated to go up in flames at a certain moment and destroy the inmates. There was a fire, of course, but the one to perish in it was the hireling architect who had designed the wax mansion, and not the Pandavas for whom the elaborate tower trap was built. All 5 brothers escaped and wandered in the country disguised as Brahmins, wearing sacred thread and clothed in deerskin, their face covered with hirsute cloth. The Kauravas had taken it for granted that their enemies were no more. When they learned that Pandavas were still intact, what was more, he had won the hand of Draupadi, they were filled with rage and consternation. Hasty consultations were held to decide how to ward off this menace on their security. A cobra which you have hit and not killed will pursue you until it destroys you. They had said, speculating on various schemes to kill the Pandavas, starting with the hiring of assassins to creating jealousies over the possession of a single wife. हम कल पढ़े माँ तुम सो गई अच्छा. The Kauravas speculated on this last with relish. 5 men to possess one wife, unheard of sin. They will be ridiculed and castigated by all mankind. With all their speculations, they could do no more than to come to the conclusion that for the moment the only practical course for them would be to let the Pandavas rule their half of kingdom and bide their time. The Pandavas established themselves on a deserted piece of land, built their capital and called it Indraprastha, a city of splendor. The palace was enormous. They had created a paradise out of ashes and mud. To celebrate re-establishment, they held a Rajasuya Yagya, and as a matter of propriety invited their enemy cousins to it. Duryodhan with his brothers and henchmen arrived in great style, mostly to spy on the prosperity of the Pandavas of which they were hearing so much. कल पढ़ेंगे, मम्मी सो गई हैं.